before we get started, for the few people that haven't seen the first episode of us, maybe give them some background of who you are and why you're excited about Bitcoin.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Brandon Bedford. I'm an entrepreneur and content creator. I currently live in South Korea. I moved here from Canada just about 2 years ago. So I was born and raised in Canada, moved across the world, and spent about 10 years working in B2B tech, all startups, so very small companies, and many of them were in the AI space. And after working in tech for close to 10 years and then seeing what was happening in the world with the COVID lockdowns and the pandemic. Don't have to go down that rabbit hole right now, but seeing how the world responded to those things, it got me very, very curious about money. I started learning about inflation and central banking and quantitative easing and stocks and bonds and all of these topics that Bitcoiners know very well. And I became a Bitcoiner, I'd say, class of 2020. And I genuinely believe that Bitcoin fixes one of the most fundamental problems in society today. So out of the 10 years that I was spending in tech, about 8 of those years was in sales. So I was selling, complex technology to big Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 companies. And one of the first things that I learned in sales is you can't really convince someone to buy something just by talking about the solution. You have to convince them that the problem exists first. And I suppose that's really been my focus. That's how I got orange pilled myself, was learning about all of the ways that the fiat system is broken and how our time and energy is being stolen from us. And so that's what led me to my current endeavor, which is a YouTube channel and newsletter called Wealth Potion, where I talk about all those topics: inflation, central banking, personal finance, that all lead people to Bitcoin, but it's not explicitly about Bitcoin. Right? On my YouTube channel, I have about 50 videos, maybe 2 or 3 are specifically about Bitcoin, but all the other videos all kind of hint towards Bitcoin. So that's what I've been up to lately.
Really, really cool. It's super important because the problem is we still have so many people that aren't aware of the real problem. So how would you describe what's the fundamental problem that you see that Bitcoin is solving?
Ooh. It's a good question. I think the simplest way I could put it is the money is broken. And while some people might hear that, I know your audience is primarily Bitcoiners, so they get why that's so important. But I think a lot of non-Bitcoiners, no-coiners, friends and family that I speak with, they might brush that off as not that important of an issue. Why I think that's so important is that money is how we exchange our time and energy in this finite life, right? Michael Saylor and Safety and a Moose and all these people have said this much more elegantly than I have. So it's not a new idea I'm presenting, but it truly is our life's work. It's our blood, sweat, and tears that we give to the world, and we get money in exchange for it. And so when the money is broken, when the money serves the cantillionaire class that's close to the money printer before the rest of the people, that creates massive problems all throughout the world. It obviously creates issues when it comes to class mobility and wealth inequality, but as many other Bitcoiners have pointed out, it affects everything in our lives. It affects our material desires. It affects the media and the news that we take in. It affects our food and our nutrition and the ingredients that are being put into our food. It impacts our morality and the way that we make decisions and how we decide if we're going to do something right or wrong because we feel like we're getting poorer. So I see the money as kind of bleeding into all the other aspects of our life. And so I think it's one of, if not the most important issue, at least in our material world, that we can at least first identify. Like I said, I and yourself and many viewers believe that Bitcoin is the solution. But I think the very first thing is we need to get everyone on the same page that, hey, there's a problem with our money.
And we see that in so many ways. I was fascinated by the US politics the last year, even though I have nothing to do with the US. I mean, that's not true. I have a lot to do with the US actually, or most of my viewers in the US, most of my partners are in US. I literally hold now 30% stake in a US LLC. So like I actually have a lot to do with the US, but I personally am not in the US and I'm not a citizen there and all those things. So I don't really have an incentive of looking at the US and like, hey, like, okay, what's going on with the politics? But it's really interesting because it is the world power and they have the world reserve currency. And with that in mind, it's interesting what's going on. We have Trump now being elected. He's talking now about Bitcoin, how we can repay the debt with Bitcoin. Then he's starting a trade war, like tariffs with all the things that he's doing there. Then we had that Elon thing with Doge, which was very interesting for me to witness. How do you see all of that, what Trump kind of did since he's in office, and maybe also how this kind of shows that this broken money system is also leading into politics and what effects and implications this has?
Yeah, I think it's a sign that we're winning. And I want to be very careful here. I don't mean it's because Trump is embracing Bitcoin and passing the Genius Act and doing all these pro Bitcoin things perceivably. That's why we're winning. We're winning because the president of the United States is paying attention to Bitcoin. And I love what, I think it was American Hodl that said this recently on a podcast. Like, Bitcoin doesn't need Donald Trump. Donald Trump needs Bitcoin. And I think we as Bitcoiners need to start recognizing that we actually hold a lot of soft power. Sure, we're a small but mighty group, but getting Ross Ulbricht freed, for instance, like that was a huge win for, the Bitcoin and Bitcoin adjacent movement. And so I think to answer your question directly, like what is going on with the, this political stuff, I think it's a natural evolution of Bitcoin adoption. Do I think that it's going to stay like this forever? No, I don't think so. I think the next president, whether they're Democrat or Republican, they probably will change their minds about Bitcoin. There's going to be this infighting, but I really think that it's inevitable. I think a lot of Bitcoiners kind of have that view, and maybe that's a little bit arrogant, maybe it's a little overconfident, but as Lynn Alden says, nothing stops this train. Both the federal debt, to your point about Doge, but also Bitcoin adoption. And that kind of reminds me, this isn't really related directly to your question, but that's the same way that I feel about corporate adoption. I know a lot of Bitcoin maxis right now are up in arms about Bitcoin treasury companies, how it's not real Bitcoin. You're not actually a custodian when you do this. You are not trust. You're violating don't trust but verify. Yes, all those things are true, but we're not going to get to hyper Bitcoinization without corporations adopting Bitcoin. And if individual people, retail investors, want to risk their capital by investing in Bitcoin treasury companies, all the power to them. But I think at the end of the day, that is a sign that Bitcoin is winning. When you see corporations start to adopt Bitcoin as a treasury asset, when you start to see countries starting to, particularly the United States, as you put it, the leading hegemon right now, creating legislature that is, at least at first glance, favorable to Bitcoin. I think we have to be careful putting our trust in politicians, certainly, and I don't think I need to remind Bitcoiners of that, but we are winning.
Yeah, it's interesting with the treasury companies because on the one, like, there's nothing wrong with great companies that have like real products, real services, and just like offer them to the world. They are adopting Bitcoin and saving them on the balance sheet. Like that's what we want. We want individuals, companies, and all of the other ones to save instead of dollars and stocks and all the other things, Bitcoin. Like as a Bitcoin maxi, you want that, right? But I think a lot of the criticism comes from first, I think envy a little bit, maybe also because there's like those things that make more returns than Bitcoin. That could be the case. And I like just full transparency. I never invested in anything else than Bitcoin. Like I had Michael Saylor on my show. I was at his party in Miami, and I still never bought a single strategy stock. Not because I don't like it, just because I have this policy. I have 100% Bitcoin. I love strategy and I love what they're doing. I just like rather stick with Bitcoin in my self-custody setup. With that being said, it is an interesting development where we have companies that have those fiat games piled in with Bitcoin. They're trying to get with just fiat games and credit games more Bitcoin, where I'm like, that probably works for strategy. That probably works for the number 2 and 3 also. But there is a way where maybe company number 20 that does that at some point blows up. So I see some risks there. I don't know if anything really happens. I know as someone that just holds Bitcoin in self custody, I don't care. Like I don't have to care. I certainly think the criticism against Bitcoin treasury companies is overblown. Like they're just saving in Bitcoin as everyone else. Like what's the big problem with that? But I can see the criticism if there's companies that just do that. Like if your company is only buying Bitcoin with fiat systems, credits, I don't know if that's a good idea. But if there's a real company with real use cases and they are providing services and products to the world and saving in Bitcoin, like that's what we want, right?
Totally. Yeah, I think that's a great distinction to clarify my earlier point. Yes, there of course are going to be bad actors that will try to take advantage of this adoption wave. And very much akin to how crypto and altcoins did the same thing by trying to graft off of Bitcoin's popularity. So at the end of the day, investors, have to do their due diligence and take a look at the company's balance sheet and their executive team. Like that is the trust, don't verify piece, or rather verify, don't trust. They have to do that due diligence if they're going to invest in those companies. And I'm the same way as you. Like I'm fully in like Bitcoin itself. Now, I guess there is an exception to that because I do have tax-free accounts that have to hold stocks. For instance, when I was back in Canada, so those are invested in a Bitcoin ETF. So again, yes, there's a custodian involved, but it's Bitcoin. It's tracking the Bitcoin price. But I think that's a good analogy to think of some of these other products, especially as you start to look at Michael Saylor and what he's doing at MicroStrategy with STRK and STRD, and now STRC was just announced this week. These are all financial vehicles and financial products that aren't necessarily for people like you and I. They're not for retail investors. And that doesn't mean retail investors can't do their own due diligence and buy them, but there are certainly funds out there that have mandates to specifically buy bonds or specifically buy stocks or whatever it might be, or they have to maintain certain portfolio weightings. And so by offering these products, I've seen the analogy used of it's, Michael Saylor's creating these pumps or these funnels from these large pools of capital that can get tapped into. Now, of course, we'd love to see, the bond markets just sell the bonds and buy Bitcoin, but that's just not how the financial system today works. And so I think we have to, Michael Saylor is very clever, and his whole financial team there with Fong Li and what have you. They're very clever in terms of how they are building these products to appeal to specific pools of capital. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on all of those things, but I think, yeah, you and I will stick with Bitcoin, but hopefully those things all create tailwinds for Bitcoin by pulling in capital.
I was just searching it, but I cannot find it right now. There was this chart as shown, like what is the big things, and then there's the small pumps to Bitcoin, and what kind of product of strategy is pumping from which market to Bitcoin. And I think that's the best way to look at it. That those treasury companies are actually, and also the ETFs, unlocking new capital that was trapped in the fiat world. And I had multiple podcasts now where we talked about the sizes of those unlocked capitals, and it's a magnitude of what Bitcoin in total is worth right now. So if that unlocked capital, just like one or few percent come from that to Bitcoin, that will blow up Bitcoin so much. And so it's interesting to see the blowback, because it's like, did you really think that Bitcoin will be the standard of the world? But institution won't be a part of that. They're just sleeping on it for years and decades. Like they have been sleeping for 15 years till they really discovered it, maybe 14, 13, depending on where you find the starting point for institutional adoption. But they're here now, and they're like very small here, but like they're here now. And that was a no, like, of course this happens. Like, what else do you think happens if there's the best performing asset ever coming around, and institutions like, I don't want it. Like, what the heck? Like, of course this happens.
Totally. It reminds me, my English teacher in high school taught me that, and to be honest, I've looked into this. I don't know how accurate this is, but she taught me that envy is when you want something that other people have that you can't have. And jealousy is when you have something and you don't want other people to have it. And I think it's kind of this jealousy, if we use that definition, where a lot of Bitcoiners have this pride when it comes to Bitcoins. Like, I figured this out. I'm, rightfully have got these investment gains from figuring out Bitcoin before everyone else. And quite frankly, the world has been calling me an idiot. They've been saying that Bitcoin is stupid, and screw you. There's this kind of defensiveness to say, like, hey, I figured out Bitcoin. I don't want corporations coming in and buying all of this Bitcoin. And so, I do empathize with that. Like, I certainly have felt like the black goose or the ugly duckling or whatever the analogy is, because I'm that weird Bitcoin guy at family reunions. Like, when I'm talking to my friends, sometimes they'll mock me when Bitcoin's down. Like, oh, how your Bitcoin investment is doing. And I think we just got to laugh that off. The curious, open-minded people will come back to us and say, hey, can you teach me about this thing? Like, what do you see something that I don't see? And the people that, laugh at you or make fun of you or brush it off, they're going to be the ones in 5-10 years that are just going to be, Peter Schiff screaming at the sky about gold and how Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme. Like, they're not open-minded enough to get it. So I get it. I think totally it's as you put it, there's this envy or jealousy or whatever, if you want to, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. And one thing that we also don't talk enough about is that the treasury companies are stealing thunder from altcoin season. And I think that's a positive thing, that the treasury companies are actually bringing financial energy to Bitcoin back, because those are actually buying Bitcoin. Those are actually involved in the Bitcoin ecosystem, rather than having the same number co-op technology people into altcoins. I'd rather have them in a Bitcoin treasury company. And yeah, there are some similarities, but like you want to have them ultimately in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And maybe with treasury companies, that's the start of the ending of crypto and the start of Bitcoin only.
Totally. You brought up that's such a good point, Robin, that I want to just highlight. Being in Korea, for those that don't know, is very heavy in the crypto side of things, not so much Bitcoin. Crypto, for last time I checked, doesn't have capital gains tax here, so it's attracted a lot of the crypto folks. Do Kwon is actually a fairly recent phenomenon. It's been crypto, not Bitcoin, for a long time in South Korea. But exactly to your point, Bitcoin is becoming a much bigger part of the conversation. I mean, we just had the second annual Seoul Bitcoin conference here in Seoul. It's a Bitcoin only conference, no crypto discussion or talks allowed. And there were a ton of talks about Bitcoin treasury companies. And so I think you're spot on in saying, like, obviously we don't have data to prove this stuff, but I do think there's absolutely a shift of attention away from crypto towards other Bitcoin products that have a risk profile and, asymmetric opportunity that attracts some of those crypto traders, right? They're like, oh, I missed Bitcoin. I don't want a 2x. I want a 10x. I want a 20x. Well, here's Metaplanet. Metaplanet just did a 10x over the past year. It's not for me, but it might be very attractive to some of these crypto trader types.
Yeah, it's a good point. And overall, the trend is our friend. Like you mentioned this nothing stops a strain analogy, and Lynn is so genius for that, because it's like we have that M2. And have you seen that that Bitcoin is now the most correlated asset to do the M2 money supply? Have you seen that graph?
I've seen the graph. I didn't know that it is now the most correlated. So, but yeah, I'm not surprised. I think that I've been I saw. I mean, there's a couple of people in the FinTwit space that have been talking about this. I particularly like Cross Border Capital. I think it's I'm forgetting his name now. Michael Howe, I think it is. Someone can correct me in the comments. Has this model where he tracks global liquidity and shows that Bitcoin basically just lags it. And so M2 is just another form of global liquidity or another measure of it. And I think it's pretty spot on. So if that stays accurate.
Thank you for watching this video. This was only a snippet of the podcast. And if you want to watch the full episode and get all of the context of this episode, you can click right here or here. Oh, maybe also here.